Well, it's always great to have you with us for the Public Square, and here we go with this week's edition. We're thinking maybe a remake of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I'm not sure we'll get that done during this hour, but maybe we can kick around the idea, Dave Zanotti.
Yeah, well, the problem is, Wayne, is that trying to get that movie remade is almost not necessary if you've been paying attention lately.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, today's conversation is inspired by the recent vote of the United States Senate regarding Pete Hegseth's nomination and confirmation to the position of Secretary of Defense. As I sat and watched that, full disclaimer right from the start, a lot of really bad memories came back about the United States Senate, which started me thinking and then reviewing and then talking. And so it's kind of like a little bit of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is happening right now, and that's what we want to get to.
Okay, so we don't need to remake it. Well, let's have the conversation today with Dave, and along with Jeff Sanders, Melody Elsie, Rob Walgate, and our producer, Alan C. Duncan. The U.S. Senate is our topic, huh?
The U.S. Senate is the problem. That's the challenge. And the reason, and this, I wish that, well, let me tell you in advance what we're trying to do. We're trying to put like a thin candy shell on this because this one definitely melts in your hand, not in your mouth. I mean, this is a hot subject, and it actually can be depressing. And so let's confront it right from the get-go. Our strategy is to portray this in the context of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, because if you haven't seen that movie, it is well worth stopping everything in your viewing habits and watching this film.
I know Jefferson Smith, and I will personally vouch for him.
There's been a big mistake.
Why don't you tell the people the truth for a change?
You're not a senator. You're an honorary stooge.
This country is bigger than the Taylors, or you, or me, or anything else. Great principles don't get lost once they come to light. They're right here. You just have to see them. Somebody will listen to me.
1939, right, Rob? Mr. Smith Goes to Washington?
1939. Jefferson Smith was appointed to the United States Senate by the governor of his state, and I don't believe the state was named in the movie, other than it was out west. I think it was just
the original story was built on the experiences of a senator from Montana, so it does have kind of based on a true story. But yeah, Jeff Smith doesn't necessarily come to us from any particular place.
Yeah, he was, and he goes. He was the head of the Boy Rangers right before before he headed to Washington, and I guess there was a bit of. He was a little naive headed there and not sure what to expect or how it was all going to play out.
He got appointed. He didn't get elected, right? He got appointed because the governor couldn't decide who to pick because somebody died.
Yeah, somebody died, and there was a guy, one of the political bosses kind of wanted someone else to take that position. They wanted someone else put in that role, but the governor went with Mr. Smith.
Well, and why did he go with Mr. Smith? His kids around the dinner table convinced him that this was the guy for the job.
They harangued the man.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They were faithful Boy Rangers, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to mention this is kind of Academy Awards, Oscars season right now for film fans. This movie was nominated for 11 Academy Awards.
In 1939, which was a tremendous year for movies, Wizard of Oz came out that year, and what did Gone with the Wind come out that year?
How many times did you go see The Wizard of Oz when I was out in the theaters, Wayne?
Wow.
I set myself up for that one.
The room
All
has
right,
gotten
I take
very
it back.
cold lately. Yeah.
And this is back when the Academy Awards still had even more sway. It was an even more respected award back then. Now it's kind of become a political exercise. But that was back when the Academy Awards kind of still meant something.
Very true.
Well, and it won one award. It was nominated for a bunch, but it was, it's, what is it? I think like number 25 in the top films in all the different ranking systems in the Library of Congress. And it's one of the most famous films ever made.
Yeah, it's considered one of the best films ever. Jimmy Stewart, Jean Arthur.
1939. So this is Jimmy Stewart before World War II.
Mm-hmm. With Frank Capra.
With Frank Capra,
and with Capra.
Directing.
And so Capra and Stewart post-World War II, and they both served, by the way, gets us to the It's a Wonderful Life stage. So you see, and this is the film, the last film that was aired in the French theaters before the Nazis took over.
Oh.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Mm-hmm. Now, this film was really controversial, and it ties into today's story. The controversy was that the United States House and Senate hated the movie. They were furious. The congressional bosses were livid. And they said there's no way in the world this film should even be released, let alone affirmed or viewed, because they felt it just put them in such a horrible light.
Thank God for the First Amendment.
Yeah. And, if The Wizard of Oz was in 1939, I think this fits in as far as a look behind the curtain, right? That's what they weren't happy with, is the peek behind the curtain to see what's happening.
So Jefferson Smith gets up there, and he's just an aw shucks kind of guy. And, they lose him as soon as he gets to town because he starts off to go on his own personal sightseeing tour because he was so totally enamored the first time he saw the Capitol. And it's very childlike and not childish, very childlike. And so as the story basically comes down to it it's a sort of a situation. It's a little bit after the story of Davy Crockett, how Davy Crockett discovered once he got to Congress that there was some very bad legislation being drafted for gain against tribal Americans. And that was a bad situation for the Native American tribes, and Davy Crockett tried to get behind it, and he got all wrapped up in going up against the power brokers, and he didn't spend much time in Congress because he couldn't stand hanging with those people. So this has got a little bit of that flavor to it. So Jeff Smith gets up there, and he's got an idea for a boys' camp, and suddenly comes into the discovery that his idea runs head on into a land deal that's been put together behind the scenes with powerful, wealthy brokers influencing the Senate. And they're trying to not tell Jeff Smith what's going on. They're just trying to get him out of the way. Well, in typical Jimmy Stewart fashion, he kind of becomes mule-like. He's just not moving, and he's just not cooperating. And he's kind of, he's just kind of adorable in the whole process. You can't get mad at him, but then he goes too far. And what ends up happening is he discovers the entire scandal, and he goes on the floor of the Senate and starts a filibuster to explain to everyone why this bill cannot proceed.
He realizes it was a real turning point in my life because as a young adult, I was watching this, and I was still kind of, gee willikers, we're all on the same team, aren't we? It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, a liberal, conservative. We're all Americans. We're all rooting for the same thing, right? And then he figures out, no, that's not the case. And by the way, the parties are never mentioned in the entire film. You don't know who is a D or an R. They're all bad.
They're all bad. They're all in it. They're all in it with, was it Big Jim Turner? Was his name?
Taylor.
Big Jim Taylor. Big Jim Taylor, who's a publicist and a wealthy baron, maybe an oligarch. And he has got his vested interest in this land deal. He's got the Senate bought. And here comes Jefferson Smith. And the fear, of course, is if he exposes the scandal and who's bought and paid for, that the bill will be rejected. My question is today, if Jefferson Smith arose and exposed such a scandal and showed who was bought and paid for, would anybody care?
Don't you think some people just assume everybody is bought and paid for already and just kind of throw up their hands like, what am I supposed to do about it?
Well, sure. That's where we're going to have to land this plane in a little bit. But yeah, that's going to be something. And in fact, that's like the turn off the radio fashion. We're trying to build bridges to keep you listening to both whatever device you're on, whatever channel you're on, whatever station you're on. Because what we're telling you right now is not good news for the naive.
And that's what I think some politicians are okay with, Alan, is the fact that where everyone thinks everyone's bought and paid for because then they just look away and say, I don't want to be involved. That's more of an excuse to be involved and engage in the process.
So the problem is the Senate. It's structurally a problem. It's politically a problem. It's economically a problem. But the biggest problem that we have right now is the United States Senate is the blocking agent. It is I could probably come up with a million illustrations. It's the funnel. It's the blocking agent. It's the brick wall. It's the place where all good ideas go to die. And the reason that that's happening is actually structural. It's not just political, it's universal. The virus has infected the entire body, and now they manage themselves and their world and their reality based upon structural systems that they have established, so that no matter what happens, the Senate has the final say. That's the number one point. The Senate has the final say. Now, is that the way the Constitution was supposed to work? That the Senate would become, in essence, the final veto power over whatever was going to happen in this country?
Not in its original design, because they didn't even develop obstructionist rules until the early 1900s.
Okay, I was taught in college, I took a course in constitutional law that it was designed to be the cooling down section of the federal government. Now, what did I know at that time? But, the House of Representatives is all crazy about passing a bill and they'll get it passed. And the Senate is supposed to, be the mature kids.
The cooling saucer against runaway majorities.
Exactly. Thomas Jefferson, I think, came up with that illustration. So am I wrong, or was I taught wrong?
No, structurally, there was this idea that there was going to be two houses in our Congress. Now, some of this goes back to the origins of our nation in part with England and Parliament, House of Lords, all right, and the members of Parliament, House of Commons, House of Lords, two different groups. So we've got these two different structures. And then it goes back to what we were talking about last week with John Quincy Adams, who made that statement that America is a complicated form of government. And so let's break down some of the complications when we come back.
Yeah, and we just might learn some things along the way here on the Public Square. Available on this radio station and online, of course, at thepublicsquare.com and with our smartphone app as well. Keep listening.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
We're just getting going today on the Public Square, talking about the U.S. Senate. I don't think we've ever had this concentrated a conversation about the Senate before, have we, Dave?
Well, we probably should have, Wayne, because we owe people better answers. This is part of the challenge of being an organization that's not just a talking head or a group of academics. Now, I don't mean to put down talking heads or academics. It's just there's a difference. We do public policy. All of us have spent time on the floor of House proceedings, of Senate proceedings. We've spent time in the courtrooms. We've spent time circulating petitions. We've spent time putting up yard signs and taking them down. We've spent time in courtrooms arguing over ballot issues and over election issues. And we've been around this process. Just on one example, on the issue of health care, we remember the 1994 Health Security Act. We have a copy of it on our desk. Right? And we also have the original copies of Obamacare with us. We've been in the weeds of public policy, working for 45 years. So what we're telling you is inside baseball, and it's not pretty. It wasn't pretty back in Jim Taylor's day. It wasn't pretty back in 1939. What we're here to tell you is that the same problem we had in 39 we've got today, except now it's worse. What do I mean by that? The Senate was not designed to be the final arbiter of everything. In the beginning, senators were elected by state legislatures.
Yeah.
They were not elected directly by the vote of the people. The Senate became part of the complicated part, or the House versus the Senate, if you will, the differences, because the Senate was designed to give states equal representation in the Congress, not based upon their population, but based upon their existence. So everybody got 2 senators. And to keep that from being hyper-elite, the idea was, well, the legislature will go ahead and elect those people and send them to Washington, D.C., as opposed to the governors appointing them. Well, then the idea got, well, we should have that even more in the Democratic tradition. and let the people, and the states were permitted to do that by the Constitution. They decided to move to basically general elections of the entire body. So it's a statewide now office in the state. That has its own set of issues and problems, but they represent the states. That's their goal, is to represent the states. They were given 6-year terms versus 2-year terms. Now, that's a stark difference. Members of Congress have to run every 2 years. That means they get 1 year to govern, 1 year to run. What's really bad about that is the federal budget, which is the largest budget in the world, is an annual budget. So 1 year it gets attention. The next year, everybody's too busy running for re-election so they can do the next budget. Not a smart idea. 2 years, but the reason that there was 2-year terms and frequent elections is because that was the way the first and most important quality control item in the construction of Article 1 was frequent elections. Because if you didn't like what your member of the House was doing, or you didn't like what the whole Congress was doing, you had a shot at them every 2 years to get rid of them. So they would have to stay very in tune with the voters if they wanted to stay in office. Now, they set 6 years for the Senate. Really bad idea. Because even today, when you have instant transportation and instant communication, 6 years is forever. People come out, they run for the Senate, they get elected. You don't see them or hear from them for 5 years. And then they show back up and say, remember me, I'm your senator, vote for me again. Everything gets played inside the Beltway, and nobody really knows what's going on. And by the time you figure out there's an issue, people have forgotten it because people have short memories. I mean, a political memory is barely 2 years. They get 6 years. They get 3 shelf lives in their first term.
The United States Senate, the Club of 100, the most exclusive club in the world, right? I mean, once you get in that club, it is difficult to be removed from it on your own.
Mm-hmm. Not impossible, though.
Not impossible.
It was John F. Kennedy in 1955 who called it the most exclusive club in the world in his book, Profiles in Courage, as a member of the most exclusive club in the world.
Would 6 years be so bad if there were term limits?
Excellent question, Wayne. I personally think it would, since and again, big deal. What's your opinion? Well, my opinion is that our organization helped write a couple of term limit laws that passed. We've been at that for a while. We've studied term limits extensively. We didn't used to think it was a good idea. We came to a different conclusion and got very busy in it. So no, I think that for the way that politics in America works today, 4 years should be across the board. Now, I still think 2 years was fine for the House, though I wouldn't be opposed to House races being 4 years. But I don't think that the Senate, that there's nobody who gets a 6-year term. It's just too long. That would be one thing that would help dramatically. Then clearly term limits for members of Congress, we not only would we support, we wrote laws to pass them. We passed those laws and the court struck them down. And those laws came across our desk. So, I mean, we couldn't be more in favor of that, to promote rotation in office, which is something that happened regularly in the founding era. And the reason there are not term limits in the United States Constitution is because nobody thought they'd be necessary. Nobody thought anybody would ever try to make a career out of this.
Or live that long. We were talking in staff about life expectancy back in the founding. Could be pretty rough sometimes. So,
well, let's take a look at Mitch McConnell. He's the longest serving Senate leader in the history of the Senate. He's been there for 42 years. That's a long time.
And he's not healthy.
He's not. Look, no disrespect to Senator McConnell. He's earned plenty of credits and praise, and I'm not trying to be a cheap shot on us, but Senator McConnell is having mini strokes in public.
Right.
We've all seen it. I mean, Joe Biden was criticized by me as much as anybody else for hiding his disability for 5 years. Mitch McConnell's doing the same thing, and the Republicans are covering up for him. The hypocrisy of that is beyond imagination. And he was the Senate Majority Leader, and they did us all a big favor announcing that he would resign from the Senate Majority. But he's still scheduled to run for re-election in 2026. He's 82 years old.
Is there no one on his team that can pull him aside and talk to him?
Well, the folks on his team also get a paycheck, and a bigger paycheck the longer he serves in the United States Senate. So they would have to put country above self and be willing to do that. And maybe some have. Some may have.
We don't know. Yeah,
we don't know.
possible.
But he doesn't appear right now to be willing to vacate the seat.
He's not the only one. I mean, Dianne Feinstein was in the United States Senate when she died at age 90. She never resigned. She died in office, and in the last several years of her life, she couldn't dress herself. She couldn't comb her own hair. I don't know about her mental state, but physically she just could not be there, and yet she stayed in.
So what has created this club of 100? How did we get here is the big question. I mean, I can remember the first time I interviewed a member of the club. This was a long time ago, and we were doing an interview for a voting publication, and it was my assignment to interview Senator John Glenn. Right? Well, I got to tell you, it didn't take 30 seconds from the time we said hello and started for me to feel the disdain that Senator Glenn felt that somebody would dare to schedule an interview where he would have to answer questions open out loud to an open microphone without a script, without a prompting about why he was running for office and how he saw some of the issues. He was really upset. The entire thing. I mean, you talk about someone looking down their nose. It was disdain it was terrible. I was scarred by the experience. Now, John Glenn's gone. I hope he's off to his eternal reward in heaven. And it's not personal, but he made it very personal. He made it very personal. Wow. He was upset that someone dared ask a question. And I took note. I'm a poor guy working for a nonprofit with kids to feed. And this guy has got a tie that cost more money than the suit I was wearing.
Well, he's also orbited the Earth, like first guy to orbit the Earth. So I wonder if that's any part of it.
And in modern American mythology, he's always portrayed as this wonderful, happy-go-lucky, super patriotic guy, And then I hear this story and I go, whoa, there's something else going on behind the curtain.
He was the only guy in the room with a manicure.
Are you serious?
No, I'm serious.
He's a Marine combat pilot.
What hair he had left was perfect. The shirt was brilliant and beautiful. The shoes, heaven knows how much they cost. Everything that he did reeked of the Club of 100.
Wow.
And every time I saw him from that time forward until the time he left the Senate, I noticed the same, and it only got worse.
And on the flip side, we have a large number of individuals now who are serving in that club who are very down to earth, very transparent,
literally,
very. Yes, I think of Mark Wayne Mullen.
Oh, I like him. Yeah.
Who just speaks straight, even in public at a hearing with out of the office, talking to just a regular group of ordinary people.
Tom Cotton.
Right. So I think it's a combination. The issue with the Senate is a combination of who and what.
And I will counter with this. Let's watch and see how long it takes for the system to break them down.
Well, that's a good point.
Well, that's the what. I mean, there are problems with the system itself and the structure of it and how they can function. So, you're right. People do get compromised. I'm an optimist.
Me too.
I want to think that these new people coming in a new era are going to do things differently, like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington type people, but we'll see.
And we are going to pause right here on the Public Square for a quick break. We'll be back to this discussion today about the U.S. Senate with our team around the table. Stay with us.
Guess this is just another lost cause, Mr. Payne. All you people don't know about lost causes. Mr. Payne does. He said once they were the only causes worth fighting for. And he fought for them once. For the only reason any man ever fights for them. Because of just one plain, simple rule. Love thy neighbor.
table today at the Public Square, Dave Zanotti, Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, Rob Walgate, and Alan C. Duncan, our executive producer, and I'm Wayne Shepard. We're talking about the U.S. Senate today. Very informative, Dave.
The title is "The Senate is the Problem," and I'm the Grinch. There's going to be all kinds of additional optimism offered by the panel today because these are good, God-fearing, hope-filled human beings, and they're not naive. And I have not forsaken hope, but I have to tell you, it's much worse now than it has ever been. Let's take just for a moment and watch what happened with the confirmation hearings and the vote for Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. This was a position that it was known for weeks that the votes were there because it only requires a simple majority for confirmation, that the votes were there. Yet the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, is and has been doing everything in his power to use every trick on the books to delay the process of debate and meetings and votes and proceedings. Everything in his power. Why? Thought we're on the same team here. Every one of these people's got enough votes. What's the holdup? Well, if the Senate Minority Leader can keep these people from getting to work, he can slow down the reforms of the new administration and slow down their agenda. Does it matter that we should probably have a Secretary of Defense because there are people out there who want to go to war with us? Nah, don't worry about it. Politics is more important. Just like it didn't matter that we had a president hidden in his basement and then hidden in the White House for 5 years. Where was the Senate then? But it was their president, so it didn't matter. Okay, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I condemn the actions of delaying, whether it would be a Republican or a Democrat. But I just have one opinion. But it's an opinion from someone that's been in the room. So we watch this proceeding on television. Do you notice that the Senate controls when the networks get audio feed versus not? Because there's only 100 of them. They hang around at the front of the well and they talk. They talk loud enough that microphones could pick it up. And heaven knows we don't want to hear what they're really talking about, right? We don't want to hear that stuff. They don't want us to hear that stuff. They just want us to hear what they want us to hear. Okay. So they hold their session and it's delay and delay and delay and delay and delay and delay. And you see the majority leader, the minority leader, you see the handshaking, you see the shucking, the jiving, the games that gets played, just watching them in a few brief moments. And the amount of memories that it brings back to me as to how these people really do business. But wait, it's not just about the Democrats. Hardly. Because when it came time for the votes were there. So what did the majority leader do, or the former majority leader, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, do? What did this longest-serving, esteemed Republican former majority leader do to help his party get their nominee for the country, which they had earned the right to have? He voted no. He voted no. To force the President of the United States to call upon the Vice President of the United States to come and break the tie. Did the Democrats force him to break the tie? No. The Democrats were honest. They all voted no. And went kicking and screaming the whole way into their vote to delay. Childlike, immature, worthy of the club of 100? Yeah, because it's become a wrestling match, a playpen. But Mitch McConnell went right into the playpen with them. What's the message he's sending? I may be completely infirmed. I may be having strokes in public. I may not be able to put two sentences together. But the power of the Senate is a power you better be aware of, Mr. President, because we can still hit you when we want to.
And I think it highlights the fact as well, when you look at Kentucky, when you look at Alaska, where a lot of folks say, well, the Republicans hold a 53-47 edge. Talking about Murkowski and Collins be Republican senators as well. But when you look at Kentucky and Alaska, who both overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump, you would think the United States senators from those states would say, hey, we're going to support the nominees from the president because our constituents said overwhelmingly that's who we want to serve. But that didn't happen in either case. And I think with the Murkowski and Collins from Alaska and Maine, respectively, it didn't really surprise anyone because they knew that they were going to be against the administration.
in any case, it's politics 101. The most important thing we must understand as American citizens in regards to our expectations for reform of our government is this. The Senate is its own exclusive party. They are a party of 100. They are a club of 100. They will control anything they have to control their power, because right now they believe they have veto power over any administration, any court, or any act of the House of Representatives. Now, they will laugh and mock and look down their nose from their $1,000 chairs and $2,000 suits at all of us, the same way John Glenn did from the start with me, and say, oh, you're so naive. Haven't you been to the Library of Congress? Yeah. Haven't you ever read? Yeah, been there, read that, did that, done that. Yeah. You guys are rats. It's just that simple. Big Jim Taylor lives here. And all the Mr. Smiths that come here end up fainting on the floor and getting dragged out. Because you're more interested in controlling power than you are anything else. Now, that is an accusation of character. Sure, it is. What's it based on? It's based on the Senate rules. The Senate rules, right? Our favorite rule, Rob, right? The filibuster.
Yes, filibuster. And isn't that another thing that was highlighted in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington? The ability to use the filibuster and how it was used now. And I understand in the 30s, it's used a tad differently than what it's used today, but it still has the same concept of being able to log jam everything or prevent things from happening.
Well, in the film, we need to be fair, it was used for a positive device.
Yes, it was.
That was the kind of the heroic plot device that allowed him to win.
I think it would be helpful to even just define terms. Filibuster, ongoing debate, to delay a vote. So they have processes in place. The most egregious is the one that was put in place in 1917 to end a filibuster on any measure, and that would be the word cloture. So cloture is the procedure that is used to end a debate. In 1917, they changed Senate rules to require a 2/3 majority, which would be 66 senators, to end debate. That was revised again in 1975 to lower that threshold to 60, to the 3/5 majority.
Now, that definition, Melanie, sounds genteel and fair on both sides. You have the right to filibuster, and we have the right to say we've heard enough. We need to move on. That seems like balance, but cloture doesn't mean end debate today.
No, cloture means let's disrupt the process so the bill never gets through, because you have to have those 60 votes now to keep the process moving. So if the process comes to a dead stop, you've hit a brick wall. Cloture is the brick wall. I think it's so interesting that we need 2/3 majority for the Senate to approve a treaty. You have to have 2/3 majority in the both chambers to override a veto. Those are very substantial procedures in those chambers. There shouldn't be the same 2/3 or 3/5 or supermajority to simply move a bill through the process.
And just to be clear, for people that are just listening to this the first time, let me say again in definition of terms. Today, they flipped the words filibuster and cloture to mean that if you want to see a measure come to a vote, you must get 60 votes that say, let's vote on this. If you don't get 60 votes to say, let's vote on this, the measure never comes to a vote. It doesn't matter whether somebody's filibustering or not. The meaning has been completely inverted.
You're voting to vote.
You're voting to vote.
Hey, got to call timeout for a break, and I hate to do it in the middle of this conversation, but there is an important point to be made. We'll get to it coming up on The Public Square here and online at thepublicsquare.com. All right, let's jump right back in where we left off a few moments ago here in the public square, Dave.
So in the old days, cloture and filibuster meant someone's trying to stop a vote from happening, so we have the ability to move the process along. Now it's been completely inverted. Every bill that's there for proposal has to reach a measure of cloture. In other words, you have to vote to say it's time to vote. On a whole bunch of stuff, the number that has to be reached is 60. In other words, if you want to stop a piece of legislation, but not get held accountable for stopping it, you just say, I'm not going to vote for cloture. And if enough of us don't vote for cloture, the measure never becomes a vote. So we stop the proposal without ever being held accountable for stopping the proposed law. It's brilliant strategy, by the way. I mean, it's so smart you feel like mafia people put it together. It's really smart.
You're not
You can
far
control
off.
the law and never get caught. Now, but Melanie, there are some exceptions. Let's talk about those.
And to put a fine point on what you just described, this only exists in the Senate. They don't have a cloture rule in the House. That's why you can have a one-person majority in the House and still get a bill through. So in the Senate, they did what's called the nuclear option, where they went procedurally and revised that Rule 22 to allow for Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader, in 2013 did this process to allow for a simple majority in all of the president's nominations for positions except for the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2013, they still held on to that cloture 60-vote majority for the Supreme Court nominations. That was pulled back in 2017, 4 years later. Mitch McConnell then turned around and used the nuclear option to revise the rule to allow for a simple majority on all Supreme Court justices as well. So my question is, why can't they go back in and revise the rule and use the nuclear option to change that 60-vote threshold for any measure?
And we have talked about this when Democrats were in control of the House, Senate, and White House as well. So for those listening to say, well, it's interesting you talk about that rule now when Republicans are in control. We said it when the Democrats were in control of everything, because then it would force senators to run on their vote, because there's many that talk a big game, but when it comes time to voting, would they be willing in their districts that are swing states to make that decision?
Now, the argument made for cloture by some very bright people and people I care for is that the idea of the Senate was to stop a runaway majority, and that there's a certain advantage that sometimes such a threshold, it can be valuable and helpful. That may be true. Here's the problem. This is where reality hits, and it's very uncomfortable. Until you have 60 members of the United States Senate that are constitutionalists, conservatives, ready for genuinely reforming our system of government, it's not going to happen. It is because there's no motive for it to happen.
It's also messing up our budget process, because in the budget process, you have a normal appropriations bill, let's say. What they're using now is a mechanism called reconciliation, which they're only allowed to use spending revenue and federal debt limit one each in a given year. So you can't use reconciliation for any budget measure. You're limited, so you have to be very picky about how you spend that privilege of using the reconciliation process. That involves the House as well. That's not just the Senate then.
So you and I have seen this, we've all seen this in state legislatures, Christmas string bills. In other words, trying to pack everything into a budget mechanism whereby you have to vote on the giant thing. And if you don't say yes, then somebody's going to be mad at you because you missed point B or point C or point. In other words, it messes up everything. And what they're doing is they're trying to get around the 60-vote cloture.
In the Senate, right.
Now, these people aren't stupid. I understand they're very, very bright, and they know exactly what they're doing. So the point is, we don't have the numbers. We simply don't have the numbers.
How far away from the numbers are we?
10.
Okay.
10. Let's take a look at Hegseth. He couldn't get 3 members of his own party to vote for him. Now, that question, you have to ask the question, are there even members of his own party? You see, when it becomes the loyalty of the Senate or the loyalty to the party.
Is he a special case, though? I know we're using that as an example. Is that a special case just because of who he is?
No.
Was John McCain a special case when he gave the thumbs down and enabled Obamacare to become the law of the land based on the very same principle?
Well, let's talk about how the Senate protects themselves, because there was another nominee that was up for vote from the United States Senate last week. And that one passed 99, or was confirmed 99-0. Yeah. But the reason why, in my opinion, the reason was he was a member of the Club of 100.
That's right.
That's the difference. They take care of their own, and they prove it time and time again. And of course, we're speaking of Marco Rubio, former senator from the state of Florida, who's now the Secretary of State.
I was just going to say, and don't forget that the three who voted against Hegseth, they're not the only three in the Republican Party. I see it as sort of a revolving team. You've got other people like Joni Ernst. You've got Tom Tillis of North Carolina. And there are others who are not.
Tillis, who started off as a rock-hard conservative to get elected, now suddenly has continued to move and morph and move and morph.
Yeah, and there are others I could name, but I won't. And they are not reliable votes for a conservative, principled constitutionalist.
Well, let's name one who can't defend himself because he's passed on. What about Arlen Specter? Oh. Remember how George W. Bush and Newt Gingrich said, we've got to have Arlen Specter. He's our guy. Yes, he's a liberal. And as soon as they put him in, and they put him in over Rick Santorum, and Specter was elected, he flipped on them and joined the Democrat Party.
Mm-hmm.
This is the world of the inside the Senate.
2 examples, current day. We just had cloture votes on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. So that's a cloture vote to end discussion to move on to a vote. And it didn't reach 60. It was 52 to 47, and one person didn't vote. So you have a bill that literally is not preventing abortions. It is saying if the abortion results in a baby being alive, you have to take measures to protect the life of that baby. And you had 47 senators said no thanks to even finish the conversation and go to a vote.
But that does split pretty much down party lines on that. I mean, you have 45 Democratic senators and then 2 that are independent but caucus with the Democrats. So that basically split party lines.
That's exactly my point. People elect senators to go and represent them to cast votes on policy. And the policy can't, if this policy had come to the floor, it would have passed with a 52-vote majority, with a majority of the sitting senators, which is what the Constitution requires. Then you have the Lincoln-Riley Act, which had a cloture vote on January 17, and that cloture vote passed with 61, barely passed. And we're talking about a measure that protects citizens from heinous actions of people who are here illegally. And you still had 35 senators vote no to stop the conversation and proceed on to the vote. So that act went on to receive a favorable passage. But these 2 votes are just cloture votes to say we're going to stop the discussion and allow for an actual vote on the bill, on the policy.
Very interesting, Melanie. Thank you for that. And there is more of this conversation. It's going to be heard coming up in just a moment on the Public Square. Some of you, because your station cuts away at this time, have to leave us. The rest, of course, is always online or on the smartphone app called The Public Square and thepublicsquare.com.
Need a breath of fresh air? How about a musical pause that brings a moment of refreshment? Hymns on the Square is the place to gather to hear the inspiring music of artists who have contributed to this mission for decades. Visit thepublicsquare.com and walk on over to Hymns on the Square for a free concert of hope and a breath of fresh air. Hymns on the Square at thepublicsquare.com.
Okay, we've been talking about the U.S. Senate as a problem here on the Public Square this week. Do we have a solution, Dave Zanotti?
Well, before we get to the solution, let's go back to Melanie's point on how things can't get done. We've had the privilege of working with, visiting with, being on Capitol Hill lots of times. I've got at least an hour's worth of stories, and I only have a few minutes. I can't get them all in. We'll talk about them more over this year, but one I do want to bring up was with someone who was, without a doubt, one of the most bipartisan people I've ever seen, and nonpartisan people in politics, and that's former governor of Ohio, George Voinovich, who I served with at his call and request in assisting him on a number of significant projects, and our organization served and helped him on a number of major policy initiatives. We worked with this guy. We drove with this guy. We ate with this guy. We worked hard for ideas together. So we all got to know him and his family. Decent human being. The person who received more votes in the state of Ohio than any other politician in history over his career. He moved from office to office to office. He became a member of the United States Senate, and I would visit with him on occasion there at his request. And so one time I was up visiting with him, and he looked at me and he said, "How are you?" I said, "George, I'm great. How are you?" He said, "I'm miserable." I said, "Are you well? Are you okay? Is Janet okay?" He said, "I'm miserable. I can't stand it here. I wish I was governor again." Mm-hmm. I said, "Why?" He said, "David, we can't get anything done. We can't fix anything." It took a number of years for him to finally realize that the rules were not suggestions, that those Senate rules and that Club of 100 and that leadership group, you could not bring ideas of genuine reform. He was a budget guy. He wanted to balance the federal budget so badly. He worked and slaved at his own personal disposal to try to win people over. And they just continued behind closed doors to laugh at him because he was not in the power curve. And the 60 votes would never be there. Never be there. He looked at me and said, "I wish I was governor again. At least then we could get something done." So, how do we get 60 people like that guy? 60 people like a number that are there right now who need help. Because if we don't have 60 people up there who you can count rock hard at being honest constitutionalists to put country above party and principle above party always, if we don't have 60, we are just flapping our gums. Because real change isn't going to happen. So I got an idea. I mean, we got to come up with 10. Here's an idea. Let's get one in Kentucky. I don't care what party they are. Let's get one in Kentucky that's going to actually vote as a constitutionalist. Because Mitch McConnell's got no darn business being there again.
Well, because there's, 33 up, 33 states that can be voting for this in 26?
Yes.
Anybody see an opportunity, a window of opportunity to get rid of a Club of 100 person and get a constitutionalist around?
Georgia.
Yeah.
Georgia has two. One is
Ossoff.
up for election.
John Ossoff is up for election in Georgia.
Remove him from office, please.
I'm looking at the list now.
Georgia.
We need to first explain that I think that make sure people understand the 100 senators are divided into 3 classes, and 1/3 of the Senate runs every 2 years. So this year, the terms that expire in 2027, we will be electing those individuals in 2026. Okay, so we've got 20 Republicans. We have 13 Democrats who are running for re-election. Some of them are going to be tough to replace in terms of re-election bids. You know, Dick Durbin in Illinois, it would take a miracle to replace Dick Durbin.
I asked anywhere in the country where you see 10 seats. They're not there. That's my point. We've got 2.
Now, John Fetterman crosses over potentially. He could be a crossover. If he's open to voting against his caucus, he might be one we could count.
And the point is that we don't care what party they're a part of. I agree with you completely. It doesn't matter whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, or Martian. I don't care. Show me 10. Now, by the way, we only have 10 minutes in this segment, and we could keep this going. The point of the conclusion is we got 2. If anybody's got 3 or 4 or 5, name them right now, because...
Well, I think Michigan could be a chance. I mean, all
right, Michigan. You don't have to name any names. Michigan
could be a chance.
Right.
Possibly John Hickenlooper in Colorado. Possibly
Michigan, Colorado. We had Kentucky, Michigan, Colorado, and what was the other? Pennsylvania?
Georgia.
Okay, here's my point. We're making the point we're asking this out loud, and we're noodling it together without a script, okay? Mm-hmm. So far, we've seen in 4 states, there's the potential of 1 seat changing over the next several years. Because it takes several years, and Melanie's right, they run in classes. To change the Senate takes 6 years. Mm-hmm. So this may take 12. It may take 18. It may take 24. It's not easy to change. So what does that say? That says we better lower our expectations, because all the hoopla about all the reform that's coming to our government is going to experience the same thing Pete Hegseth experienced. They'll shut off the mics, hold their counsel, and do what they want to do. But he didn't need 60 votes, and most of the changes we want to see happen do.
To be honest, Dave, I think this is why we see a lot of policy happening through executive order, whether it's constitutional or not. A president, whether it's President Trump this term, this administration, or the next president, or the next guy after that, they're using the executive orders to move forward on agendas, on policy, because they know they don't have the process under control to get things through, even when the same party has the majority in both chambers. It makes no difference.
What we get is the stuff that we can fix a little of, the White House tries.
Right.
If they go too deep, they get sued. If it comes to the Senate, it gets stopped.
Right.
And right now, when it comes to the idea of having to have 60 votes to have a vote on any substantive reform, we're not there. And we don't see getting there anytime in the near future. So what does that mean? That means that the reform we're all hoping for is yet out there, because we have to change the Senate, because the Senate is the problem.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see what John Thune does in his leadership in the Senate. I would love to see him come to the point of his aha moment that the filibuster rule has to change. That's the key, is changing the filibuster rule.
And Melanie, I want to be careful here, because there are people who think that the filibuster is some kind of a saving grace. Look, I'm not even going to argue about that. If that's the case, we need 10. Show me how we get them, and show me how long it takes. If we only needed 51, we might be there right now. But if the filibuster's worth it, then you better help us get 60, because without 60 constitutionalists, nothing's happening.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the Democrats saw that in the fact they were afraid to change the rules when it comes to filibuster as well, and they still were swept out of office in numerous places this year. So it just highlights what we've been saying, that the problem is the United States Senate and work that needs to be done. And that's where I feel like when we read the Constitution, when we try to understand the process, that should be the place where that exclusive club of 100, where you see leadership, where you see people stepping forward, where you see people willing to take that chance for the good of America, regardless of what letter's next to someone's name. And I think that's clearly lacking in this instance.
Okay. There's one other thought. If, in fact, while we're working towards 60, there was 30 real constitutionalists there who would actually stand together and fight and refuse to abide by the party lords and leaders, they might become a group that could actually use the filibuster to their advantage. But they did have to become a caucus of great courage.
So it's not going to be easy, but there's the game plan. And thanks for listening to The Public Square today. This is a program you may want to go back and re-listen to, and that, of course, is possible through our website and smartphone app, The Public Square. So I urge you to do that and share this program with others, even as you support the work of the American Policy Roundtable and The Public Square. Thank you, team. Thank you for listening.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.